After months and months of rain on the weekend, looks like we've finally got a decent weekend to take the boat out for a sail. Down the M1 freeway between Sydney and Newcastle. We're going to put the boat in the water at a little town called Brooklyn on the Hawkesbury River, and from there we'll head up to a little township called Spencer for the night, come home the following day. So today's adventure starts off at Brooklyn, goes underneath the Hawkesbury River Railway Bridge, then up and under the road bridges at Mooney, before proceeding to Cascade Bay, then to Bar Point, where there'll be a short stopover on the historic Bar Island, before proceeding up the river to Marlow and spending the night in Spencer before returning the following day. The Hawkesbury is an historic waterway. It is a gateway to the first settled farmlands in Australia near Windsor and Richmond. As such, it is the location of what historians now consider to be Australia's first frontier wars with the Indigenous population. It is the secret river, as described by the author Kate Grenville in her historical novel of the same name that was made into a television series by the ABC. So after all these months, I'm finally on the water looking back at Brooklyn. For a village of its size, in the first 2 decades of the Commonwealth of Australia, Brooklyn must have been visited by royalty more often than any other place in Australia. In 1901, the Duke and Duchess of York, later King George V and Queen Mary, came to Brooklyn on the New South Wales government steamer, the General Gordon. The impressive avenue of palms that today lines the entrance to McKell Park were planted to commemorate the visit of the Prince of Wales, who later became Edward VIII and then the Duke of Windsor on his abdication. Okay, we're coming up now to the rail bridge over the Hawkesbury River. This one that's here today was completed in 1947 and it replaced an earlier one, and the earlier bridges piers are still here, and you can see those in front of the new bridge. And it's not commonly known, but when that bridge was completed, in 1889, the foundations were dug down into the bed of the river using caissons, one of the earliest examples of the caisson method being used, certainly in Australia. And when the foundations were dug, they were the deepest man-made holes dug on Earth. And I have a personal connection with that bridge. In 1941, when Japan entered the war, my grandfather was working for the New South Wales Railways, and he was put on guard duty on the bridge in case of Japanese attack, along with a few of his mates. When they asked how they were going to defend the bridge, they were handed pick handles, with the idea being that if the Japanese attacked, they would run out and whack them over the head with a pick handle. And he was stationed here for a couple of months until the army took over the duties. This is Cascade Bay, and over in the distance you can see the wreck of the HMAS Parramatta, the first ship built for the Royal Australian Navy. She was built by the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company of Govan, a small suburb of Glasgow, Scotland. She entered service with the Royal Australian Navy on the 1st of March 1911. She served in New Guinea, the Mediterranean and the Black Sea during World War I, and her service ended in 1928. In 1933, she was sold and was used for carrying construction materials up and down settlements on the Hawkesbury River. She broke free of her moorings in 1935 during a storm and came to rest where she is today. In 1973, the Naval Historical Society removed the bow and stern of the ship from memorials at Garden Island Naval Base and at Parramatta Park. I have actually been to Gavan where she was built. Here is a photo of me, my oldest son and my daughter-in-law standing in front of the home ground of the Rangers football club known as Ibrox. It turns out that Ibrox is only a few hundred metres away from the home of the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company. The Rangers have been playing since 1872, so have been around 38 years before the Parramatta was built. And given the proximity, it is almost certain that the Parramatta was built by a rabble of Rangers supporters. As a lifelong Celtic supporter, however, I observe that the current state of the Parramatta is quite analogous to the current dire straits the Rangers find themselves in. No bow, so they can't go forward, no stern, so they're completely rudderless, and otherwise a rusted-out hulk of their former selves. Anyway, enough of the old firm. Time to head for Bar Island. I had a drone on board for this trip, but unfortunately needed to spend too much time learning to take off and land from the boat to be able to concentrate on getting decent videos. However, here is a short clip of the river around Bar Point. This is
the Bar Island Cemetery. And amongst those buried in here is a woman named Sarah Lewis Ferdinand. She was born in 1803 down at Broken Bay. And she married a German convict and came back to this area and essentially lived up the Marinara Creek, which is just over there. And she became a midwife to the community, both the settlers and the remaining Indigenous community as well. And while that might not seem that incredible, she was an Aboriginal at a time when the whole area here was in conflict. And when she died, she was recognised as a community leader by both the black and the white community. One of the more interesting things of the modern era is the advent of television, social media. And when you get a community leader like Sarah, they tend to have a Facebook page or a YouTube channel or are interviewed on the 7:30 report. Historical figures sometimes you don't get to see at all. But in the case of Sarah Ferdinand, we actually have some drawings of her.
At the time of her death, she was considered to be the last tribal Aboriginal from the time of the settlement of the colony. It's dinner time after a very late arrival. And what do you reckon, Georgie? That was a pretty tough day, wasn't it? That last little bit was quite difficult. So anyway, it's beef stroganoff and a good night's sleep. Been quite a day. It certainly took a bit longer to get here than I thought, but I guess if I hadn't stopped at Bar Island and at Cascade Bay, I probably would have got here quite comfortably. However, it's now bedtime. I just slide the hatch shut a bit. It's starting to get a little bit cool. So this is what a paradox looks like when you go to sleep. There's just enough room. Probably would be more room if it wasn't for having the dog next to me, but I wouldn't go anywhere without her. One of the reasons I selected Spencer as a destination was that it's actually one of the towns along the Hawkesbury River that was or played a part in what's increasingly becoming known as the Frontier Wars. I grew up in an age where basically you were taught that Aboriginal retaliation was basically vandalism or nuisance. But when you get into it, it was actually a fair dinkum war. And at Spencer here, in 1797, there was an attack here by the local Indigenous tribes on a local boatman who plied a trade ferrying people around the various settlements on the river. And the boat operator, John Lacey, later died of his wounds. He was the first of several attacks, and there was a second ambush at this location along the river. But the one that caught my attention was that in 1805, the schooner Hawkesbury got up the river as far as Spencer and couldn't get any further because the wind died, so they dropped anchor probably less than about 300 metres behind where I'm tied up at the wharf here. And the master, John Prendergast, told the crew, look, catch 40 winks, go down below, have a snooze. He went down with them, and fortunately Captain Prendergast wasn't a good sleeper, and he heard footsteps on the deck, and when he woke up, he discovered that there was a full-blown assault going on his vessel, and it was a coordinated attempt by a small fleet of bark canoes to actually take the vessel. However, it wasn't to be. The Europeans, of course, had firearms, and soon the local Indigenous people had to jump ship. And as they were swimming to shore, the leader, who had acquired the name Branch Jack, was shot in the head, and when he got to the shore, according to the Sydney Gazette, in typical melodramatic reporting of the day, recorded that he was unable to totter many paces before he collapsed to the ground, and in a languid tone declared himself in a dying state. Interestingly, the conflict between the British settlers and the local Indigenous population centred around this plant known as the daisy yam. When settlers arrived on the river flats of the Hawkesbury, they found those flats covered by this flower. They considered it a weed that had to be removed to enable the growing of corn. But it was not a weed, and nor was it growing naturally. Beneath the ground, the plant has 8 bulbs. These bulbs were the staple diet of the local Indigenous population. Each growth cycle, the Aboriginals removed the plant, harvested 7 bulbs, and replanted the 8th bulb. While it may not have been as sophisticated as European agriculture, it nevertheless was agriculture. The Aboriginals were not hunter-gatherers as I was taught at school. They engaged in agriculture, and hunting and gathering were only a supplement to their staple diet. It is perhaps unsurprising they felt the need to fight back. Well, good morning. It's painted ship on a painted river, I guess. Weather this morning. But it gives me a chance to have a bit of a chat about the last bit of the trip yesterday, which got a little bit exciting. I don't know what strength the current flows here, but it must be getting pretty close to 3 knots. And when you're coming up the river against it, and even with the outboard on, you can only do about 4.5 knots. You don't make much progress unless you go and get right in with the ducks and the crabs on the mudflats on each side of the river. The other interesting thing about it was the sunset, and I've never really tested recharging the outboard off the main battery. I know it works, but how long it takes and all that sort of stuff, I've never really had a chance to test. And with about 1 kilometre to go, I was down to 10% battery, and I think I pulled up at the wharf with about 5% left and the outboard beeping like crazy. So when Spencer says it's the hub of the universe, it may well have been for me, a hub from which I could not escape if the battery didn't charge. But the good news is, since I've taken the fridge off the main circuit, the fridge's got its own battery now, it got up to 75% charge overnight, and last time I looked it was about 80%. It's still slowly trickling in. So by the time I need the outboard, I'll have 100% power again, particularly if the sun comes out, because it charges quite quickly off the solar panels. The other interesting discovery yesterday was just how well the internal batteries on the Brass Monkey fridge worked. When I decided to take it off the main circuit, so I've got more to work with the outboard, I wondered how many batteries I might need. According to the specifications, you can get about 12 or 16 hours out of these little battery packs. And I thought, well, I'll need 2. But the 2 has proved to be overkill. When you put it in eco mode and it's up the front and it's only opened once or twice, 3 times during the day, it hardly runs. And I made it through, well, it's still got the original battery in, and we're now somewhere approaching 10 o'clock on the second day, and it's basically been running offline since about 9:30 yesterday. It was plugged into the car on the trip down, but so it's a good 24 hours out of the one battery, and it's still going. So I can thoroughly recommend the Brass Monkey fridge and the little battery pack that comes with it. Well,
I've just made an interesting discovery. Somewhere back near Spencer, I took a wrong turn and I just arrived in Central Mangrove, which was a little bit interesting. So I'm now, I've dropped the sails and I'm motoring back to the main river, and we'll resume my journey back to Brooklyn. But that was a bit of a surprise. I couldn't work out why the river was getting narrower and narrower, and it didn't look like anything I'd seen on the way up. Anyway, so I've done a little bit more exploring of the Hawkesbury than I planned.
How this happened, I am not exactly sure. I left the wharf at Spencer from this location, and as I headed out towards the river, I hit a sandbank at this location. I suspect that in the process of lifting the rudder, the boat spun around and headed up in a direction towards the creek, and I ended up thinking I was here because I could see mangroves on the port side of the boat, but I was in fact at this location here. This resulted in me heading up the creek. I began to have doubts when the waterway narrowed at this location, but it wasn't until I got to this point here and I could see the township of Lower Mangrove that I realised I was heading in the absolute opposite direction to that intended.
Okay, so we're now back at Spencer again. I don't know how I managed to do that. However, good thing I detected it before I ran out of water at the end of the creek. Well, I'm back on the main river again. Just behind me is the entrance to the creek. I accidentally took the turn up. So I've managed to unwind myself, and as time is becoming a little bit of the essence, I didn't try to sail back. I motored back because the tide is flowing up the creek, and that explains why I couldn't work out why the tide was running out when it should have been running in. Because I was heading in the absolute wrong direction. But anyway, the good news is there is a little bit of wind behind me, about 3 or 4 knots. The tide is almost all the way up now, so it means that oh, hang on, I've just run aground. Okay, I'm back. That was a bit exciting. The river went from probably 3 or 4 metres deep to 0 without warning. But anyway, that's a good thing about a paradox. The rudder hit, I was able to pull it up and just pole myself along for a little bit. And I'm now back in the deep water again. And hopefully when I get out from beyond this point in front of me, then I'll have some wind to get down the river. Well, that looks a bit better. That's the main stretch of the Hawkesbury, heading down towards Bar Island. So it gets a little tricky now. The wind it's upwind all the way down there. I'm Just got the motor idling over. There's hardly any wind. I'm tempted to motor up looking for wind. I guess the further I get down the river, the more likely I am to get it. Have to balance it against the amount of sunlight. Anyway. You can see the difficulty here with the tide. So Peter Green, if you're watching, there's what the tide is doing. You can see them slowly but surely being swept back up the river. As I come across, I've got a lift, I better take advantage of it. Not that it makes much difference here. I think coming across the tide, you're better off just getting a bit of speed up in as much as you can in this sort of wind. As you can see, I'm now being swept back on the other tack. We're really not making any discernible process against this marker here. So I think if I'm ever going to get home, I might have to motor down to the next turn in the river and I can get the breeze behind me. And with a bit of luck by then, the tide will have turned. It's getting pretty high now. Well, there's not a lot of wind here at the moment, and the flood tide's ripping in. So I've just got the outboard idling over just to hold my place against the tide. And every now and then I get a little gust and I'm an inch forward. Fortunately, I've got about an hour to go and the tide will change. This is a very difficult place to get out of. I can understand why they call it the hub of the universe, because I think a lot of people who come by boat probably never get out. But anyway, the good news is my little diversion only cost me 20% of the battery, and the sun's out now and I seem to be holding my own with the power usage. So no need for panic stations. I will get home eventually. In the meantime, the view is quite magnificent. I've decided, attempting to tack upwind against the tide in these sorts of conditions where there is almost no wind at all, it's just going to result in me ending up back in Spencer again. So I'm motoring at least down to the point, and hopefully I can get a bit of wind behind me down there. Even though it's glassy, there is a little bit of wind there. It's just blowing in the same direction as the tide, so it doesn't generate much of a mark on the water. Tide still has a little ways to come up. It's going to be a while before I get the benefit of the run-out tide. Well, we've finally got some wind. So I'm going to motor around the end of the point and we'll hopefully sail the last part of the trip home. Maybe I should have got one of these instead of the Paradox. I might not have had some of the dramas, but I'm sure I would come time to pay the refuelling costs. Okay, we're taking a shortcut here through Milson's Passage. Hopefully save a bit of the battery that way. Well, we've finally got some wind. I've made it through Milson's Passage and I had to have a bit of a laugh. The navionics just set off an alarm because I was doing 5.3 knots in a 4-knot restricted area. But that's of course a combination of the wind and the tide, so I wasn't going to slow down for anybody at this point. Well, the end is in sight. There's the first of 2 bridges I have to go under. It's just a shame there's not a lot of wind. It looked like it was going to blow in quite strong there for a little while. Well, not far to go now. That's the second bridge to get under. And the breeze is unfortunately following us, staying on the nose all the way, but at least we've got the tide behind us. After a weekend with almost no wind, it looks like we're going to go blasting home with a decent 7 to 12 knot sou'easter. It's been quite an adventure, and there's the finishing line amongst those yachts. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.